What happens when someone dies but the harm they inflicted does not? What happens when the person who caused your suffering is no longer here, but the wound still is? What if the grief does not arrive as sorrow alone? What if it arrives as anger, relief, numbness, guilt, or a complicated mixture of emotions that you don't quite know how to name? In this video, I'll explore what it can mean to grieve someone who is also a source of pain. We'll look at why relief is not an expression of cruelty, why grief after abuse can feel so difficult to name, what happens when public memory conflicts with private experience, and why healing does not always require forgiveness. Hi, I'm Rebecca-Monique, an accredited grief and trauma coach and essayist. My work lives in all the places that grief hides: endings, beginnings, love, loss, identity, race, womanhood, healing, and more. In this space, I offer gentle guidance to help deepen your reflective practice and restore connection to others, to the world, and most importantly, to yourself. Thank you for pausing here with me. Let's begin. I recently wrote an essay called When Abusers Die on grieving the people who were also wounds. The essay explores the complexity of grieving someone who harmed, frightened, neglected, abandoned, or failed us, and the emotions that may surface when they die. You can download and read the full essay using the link in the description. Here I'll be sharing 6 reflections from that essay, and my hope is that they offer language for some of the feelings and questions that may be difficult to name. Reflection 1. Relief is not cruelty. When someone who caused us pain dies, the emotions that surface may not fit neatly into the script that we have been given for grief. If relief is one of the emotions that surfaces, that doesn't make you cruel. Relief may not be what you feel at all. You may feel sadness, anger, numbness, confusion, tenderness, guilt, indifference. Perhaps several emotions all at once, perhaps very little. We might cycle through a range of feelings. There is no single correct response. But for some survivors, relief is part of the grief. Sometimes it's the nervous system recognizing that the danger has changed. The person can no longer send another message, cross another boundary, create another crisis, or find another way back into the life from which they had been removed. The body may register that before the mind has found language for it. The jaw unclenches, the shoulders drop, the stomach softens, the breath becomes deeper, the pulse no longer races towards an emergency that has not arrived. The mind may still be asking what it's permitted to feel while the body has already begun to stand down. There's a term in grief theory called disenfranchised grief. It describes losses that aren't always openly acknowledged, socially recognized, or publicly mourned in the usual way. The surrounding world often knows how to comfort someone who says, I miss them. It's less prepared for the person who says, I'm safer now. But feeling safer does not make us cruel. Relief does not mean that we summoned the death. It does not mean that we secretly wished to become the author of someone else's ending. It does not mean that compassion has disappeared. It may simply mean that some part of the body has finally understood that it no longer needs to keep watch. And that can be true alongside sorrow. Death may change the danger, but it does not automatically heal the wound. Reflection 2. Sometimes we're grieving what we never received. When a loving relationship ends through death, grief often includes the loss of an active presence. The person is no longer here to call, visit, touch, laugh with, or sit beside. But when a relationship was abusive, absent, estranged, or unsafe, the death may not create the first absence. Instead, it might just confirm the absence that has existed for years. Some grief is the weight of what happened. Other grief is the weight of what never did. Sometimes we're not grieving the relationship that we lost. We're grieving the relationship we never received. The protection that did not come. The apology that was not offered. The ordinary care that should not have felt extraordinary. The parent who never learned how to parent. The partner who never became a safe haven. The conversation that never took place. Or the version of the person we kept hoping might one day arrive. While the person is alive, however distant or disappointing the relationship might be, some faint possibility can remain. But death turns that uncertainty into finality. Some deaths close a chapter, others reveal the margins we were still writing in. There's a grief theory known as ambiguous loss. It describes loss without clear resolution. Sometimes a person is physically absent, but psychologically present. Sometimes they're physically present, but emotionally absent. In both cases, the relationship can remain suspended between presence and absence. It can't be cleanly held, nor can it be cleanly released. Another useful concept is non-finite loss. This describes losses whose consequences continue to unfold over time. The person's death may be finite, but the loss of the childhood that they failed to protect might not be. The loss of safety, apology, relationship that we hoped for might not be. And then there are secondary losses, the unobvious losses that sit beneath the primary event. The death may be the visible loss, but underneath it might be the loss of hope, belonging, repair, identity, imagined futures, and the last remaining fantasy that one day the relationship might become something else. I talk more about secondary losses in my previous video, what healing really looks like. I've also created a downloadable reflective practice on secondary losses and grief gains, which you can find linked in the description. So if this part of the conversation resonates with you, that video and practice may help you explore what else your grief has been carrying. Reflection 3. What continues when the bond was unsafe? There's a concept in grief theory called continuing bonds that challenges the idea that healthy grieving always means severing our inner connection with the person who died. Sometimes a relationship continues in an altered form, for example, through memory, ritual, objects, traditions, through the values that we carry forward, or the way a person shaped our understanding of ourselves and the world. But what continues when the bond was unsafe? Some ghosts are made not by death, but by unanswered questions. Betrayal trauma is the term used to describe trauma that occurs when a person or institution we depend on for safety, care, or survival violates that trust. Childhood abuse by a caregiver is one of the clearest examples. It can feel like a velvet hammer. The person who should offer safety and comfort becomes a source of danger. Care and threat arrive wearing the same face. Not every continuing bond is affectionate. Sometimes what continues is vigilance, a phrase, an aversion, a reflex to monitor someone else's mood, an expectation that care would eventually become debt, a habit of making ourselves smaller before anyone has explicitly asked us to shrink. Sometimes what continues is the body's memory of bracing, clenching, tightening. The person may no longer be able to create new harm, but the nervous system may still be responding to the environment it once learned to survive. An unexpected knock at the door, a familiar tone of voice, a date, a colour, a song, a place, a smell. The body can react before the mind has had time to remind it that the present is different from the past. This is one reason why grief after abuse can feel so confusing, because the person has died, but something of the relationship may still be alive within us. Healing does not require us to deny that bond. It may ask us to notice what the bond has become, what it still asks of us, and what we're ready to loosen. Reflection 4. The world may remember a different person. One of the most difficult parts of grieving someone who caused us pain is hearing other people speak warmly about them. They may remember someone generous, helpful, funny, sociable, deeply loved. Perhaps that was genuinely the version of the person that they knew. Other people's positive memories does not need to be false in order for our own account of what happened to be valid. A person can be kind in contained roles and unsafe in intimate ones. They can be generous elsewhere and treacherous at home. They can be publicly admired and privately feared. None of their goodness elsewhere erases the distress that they caused inside of the relationship, and none of their suffering requires us to soften our story. I think of this as posthumous sanitisation. It's not a formal clinical term, but it's a way of naming the social editing of complexity after death. Funerals often require compression. A whole life becomes a carefully composed service, a solemn reading, a museum of selective memories, a sequence of flattering photographs, a polished tribute. And sometimes a sentence, "they weren't perfect," becomes a euphemism so spacious that serious abuse disappears inside it. None of us is perfect, but abuse is not a minor imperfection. A funeral does not need to become a public prosecution. It does not need to expose every private detail or punish the dead for the sake of spectacle, but it may still fail to hold the reality of the living. The instruction not to speak ill of the dead may appear to protect dignity. Often it also protects the comfort of the living, the family story, the service, the reputation of the person who died. And what it can erase is the person who survived them. Silence is not always respect. Sometimes it's another form of abandonment. And we cannot heal by becoming fluent in someone else's denial. Reflection 5. Abuse does not happen outside culture. It borrows its language. Abuse can hide behind family loyalty, religious respectability, the sanctification of motherhood, the instruction not to air dirty laundry. The expectation that girls and women should become useful, gracious, forgiving, and emotionally available before they have been allowed to feel safe. And these expectations can follow us into grief. In some communities, respectability politics can become a pressure to preserve the family's image, even when that preservation requires another person's silence. That is why grief after abuse cannot be reduced to a single emotional response. A survivor may be expected to care for the person who harmed them as they become older or unwell, to organise the funeral, comfort relatives, protect children from complexity, carry the practical responsibilities, soften the story, remain gracious. Even at the end of someone's life, the old role can return: soothe, manage, explain, endure. Gender shapes this in particular ways. Women are expected to become the emotional administrators of death. And when the person who caused pain was a woman, the mythology can become even more complicated. We're often taught to treat motherhood, age, womanhood, or caregiving as though they automatically confer innocence, benevolence, or moral authority. But a family role is not proof of safety. Men who have been abused can also find themselves erased by cultural expectations. Ideas about masculinity might leave little room for men to name fear, coercion, vulnerability, or violation without being doubted or shamed. Race can shape these expectations too. There's a concept called adultification bias, the tendency to view black girls as older, less innocent, and less in need of protection than their white peers. And there's also the superwoman schema, which describes the pressure that many black women feel to appear strong, suppress emotions, succeed despite limited resources, and still care for others. Strength can be a survival strategy, but sometimes the performance of strength becomes another place where pain disappears from view. The grief is deeply personal, but it's also shaped by the world around us. And this brings us to one of the most difficult pressures of all, the belief that healing must end in forgiveness. Reflection 6. Healing does not always require forgiveness. Forgiveness is often treated as the final proof that we have healed, as though our emotional or spiritual development can be measured by how quickly we absolve the person who harmed us, as though anger means that we are still bitter, or remembering means that we are still trapped, as though refusing to forgive means that we have failed to move forward. But forgiveness is not the only language available to us, and it's certainly not a compulsory performance of healing. Forgiveness, acceptance, release, and reconciliation are not synonyms. Acceptance may mean acknowledging what happened without approving of it. Reconciliation would require mutuality, accountability, and conditions of safety. Those conditions may never have existed, and after death, reconciliation is no longer possible. Release is also nuanced. It may mean loosening the hold that the past has on our present life. Release is not the opposite of remembering, it is remembering without remaining captive. It may mean recognizing that we no longer want to carry responsibilities that were never ours. It may mean allowing ourselves to stop waiting for an apology, stop protecting the family mythology, stop trying to understand someone else's pain so deeply that we begin carrying what they refuse to hold for themselves. Forgiveness may be spiritually meaningful for some people. For others, it may not feel honest. The point is not to prescribe the correct word, but to ask what language honors our healing without requiring us to abandon ourselves. I also like to think of the word release creatively as release. Re as in to do again, and lease as in a contract, not as literal etymology, but as a reflective invitation. A revised lease, a new contract, a different agreement with ourselves. What inner contract have we been living under? Perhaps it says, I must keep waiting for the apology. I must remain angry forever in order to prove that what happened was real. I must carry their pain because I understand where it came from. I must protect the family story. I must forgive before I'm allowed to heal. I must keep part of myself waiting for them to become who I needed them to be. But what if we're ready to stop renewing that contract? What if healing is not about making the past more acceptable? What if it's about deciding gently and deliberately what we no longer wish to bear? Rivers do not carry every stone forever. Release is not the disappearance of the stone. It is the water continuing on its way. And perhaps this is where we can widen the question. If healing does not have to look like forgiveness, then grief does not have to look like public performance. It does not have to look like attendance. It does not have to look like saying the expected thing in the expected room. Public ritual is not the only way to meet a death. When a funeral feels dishonest, unsafe, or emotionally constricting, we may need another container. We may journal, write a letter we never send, light a candle, take a walk, watch the service remotely, leave words that feel true enough on a memorial page, or choose not to engage at all. We don't have to perform grief that does not feel honest. Before we close, I want to leave you with 4 questions to sit with. As always, you don't need to answer all of them at once. Take the ones that ask for your attention and let the others wait. What remains unfinished in this grief? Which 2 opposing truths am I learning to hold at the same time? What do I not owe the person who died? What inner contract am I ready to stop renewing? Perhaps the final question is not whether we have forgiven enough, grieved correctly, or found a way to make peace with every part of the story. Perhaps it's simpler than that. What are we ready to set down now? We may still remember and have days when an old feeling rises unexpectedly to the surface, but memory does not require lifelong allegiance to the weight of what happened. There may never be a single moment where the story feels complete, no immaculate closure, no final explanation that makes every part of it easier to understand. But healing does not ask us to make sense of everything in order to move forward. Perhaps it asks us to notice what has grown heavy in our hands or weighed on our shoulders and decide gently what we no longer wish to take with us. We're allowed to loosen our grip. We're allowed to rest. We're allowed to continue. May their splintered souls finally be at peace, and may we find our way back to ourselves. The full essay, When Abusers Die, on grieving people who were also wounds, is available to download and read via the link in the description by subscribing to my monthly newsletter. If this video brought something to the surface for you, meet yourself with gentleness. Thank you for reflecting alongside me. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, be well.